Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryan Suter. I'm one of the senior investment managers here at Sharewise. I'm here with Nigel Lange, the Managing Director and CEO of OncoSil Medical. So this evening, we're just going to be doing a little bit of a Q&A. So I've got a couple of questions prepped about the company, but if anybody else, one of the participants, would like to submit questions, feel free to do so through the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will ask those later on in the back end of the Q&A. So Nigel, could you just start by giving us a rundown of the company for those who aren't too familiar, and the main projects that are ongoing?
Sure, Ryan. Pleasure to be here. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining this webinar. The company has, as I think most of you will know, that we're involved in the treatment of pancreatic cancer, more specifically, unresectable locally advanced pancreatic cancer. That is our approval in Europe, and that is the current patient population that we are treating. The company's recently undergone a capital raise, as everyone I'm sure is aware. The raise was really supported by existing and new sophisticated and professional investors. So that was very pleasing for us. The proceeds of this raise gives OncoSil the necessary funds to deliver the continued commercialization of the device and the final touches to key regulatory approvals that are now in progress. And we anticipate to be able to close some of those out in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much for the rundown, Nigel. Now, just regarding the recent capital raise completed, what are the most kind of common questions that need to be answered regarding it?
Well, I think typically, people are wanting to know how long this would extend our cash runway. So clearly, this will extend. We believe it'll extend our cash runway through to the end of next calendar year. That said, we're also looking at an uptick in revenue because there are a number of initiatives now that are beginning to bear fruit. So we anticipate that, at some point in time, we'll get to a break-even point, and we're hoping that we could do that either the last quarter of 2025, calendar 2025, or at the latest, first calendar quarter of 2026. So that will help as well to extend the cash runway that we currently have with the capital raise. So we're anticipating that, at some point in time, and in terms of the time frame that I've just described, that we will be close to a break-even point.
Okay.
And that's, I think, key for investors. So the uptick in sales is very important for us.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Now, would you be able to update us on the progress with the FDA filing in the US? And just realistically, why has the progress been slow, and where do we currently sit?
So in terms of FDA, we needed to answer a lot of medical questions. So there was an initial filing that was made. And, it's important to understand that when you're dealing with a regulatory body, they have prescriptive timelines that we don't have any influence over. So the intent was to really take the existing dossier that we had submitted in the past, frame the questions around the answers to the questions around that dossier, but take that dossier so that it was much more simplified. Even though you're dealing with a regulator, I think it's important that you get the story across. Why is this technology important? We all understand that there's a huge unmet medical need, and we're going in under an HDE, or what's known as a humanitarian device. So under this particular program, we don't need to prove that the product has efficacy. We need to prove that there's probable benefit. So probable benefit for patients means that the safety profile has been established. The FDA are satisfied with the safety. And, these are questions that needed to be answered. The questions that we've currently addressed in the filing are more of a medical nature than of a regulatory nature. So they needed to be honed and reviewed and, reviewed with experts in the field, key opinion leaders that we're currently working with who are assisting us with this filing. So we anticipate being able to put out some news fairly soon. I can't give you a specific date because it's not something that we can control, but I am optimistic that we can put out some news in the not too distant future with respect to where we sit with FDA.
Okay. Okay. And just for investors' timelining, when you say not so distant future, are we talking within the kind of, the next kind of 6 months or the next 12 months or a shorter period than that?
Before the end of this calendar year.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that one. Next question. You have two active clinical trials, TRIPP FFX and 2.PANCOSIL. Can you explain the significance of both and what the potential impact a positive outcome in both with here on the business, would have on the business?
Right. So our current indication approval is the device in combination with something that is known as gemcitabine-based chemotherapy. So gemcitabine plus or minus a product called nab-paclitaxel. Now, the TRIPP study aims to put the chemo combination known as FOLFIRINOX on the label. Now, FOLFIRINOX is in most of the guidelines in Europe. So that helps us to be able to address this gap that we currently have, because it is the backbone chemotherapy that is given to patients that can tolerate it. It's quite toxic. It's more toxic than gemcitabine, but the results are better. The clinical results with FOLFIRINOX combination is statistically significantly better than they are with gemcitabine. So it's important for us to get this on our label. And we've certainly spoken about this publicly in the past when we've addressed our shareholders. So that trial is actually progressing very nicely. Sites, I think we're very much at the top end of the number of sites that we want to add. I don't anticipate we'll add many more, perhaps one or two more. But I think that's probably where we'll leave it. So it's important because what it does, it expands the population that we can treat, because typically, as I said, backbone chemotherapy, healthier patients, they're going to be given FOLFIRINOX. That is the standard of care in Europe. PANCOSIL gives us the opportunity to expand the user base. We are currently delivering the product, administering the product via endoscopy, tracked through endoscopic ultrasound. So PANCOSIL gives us another user base where we use interventional radiology, or sometimes interventional oncology, as they're called, to deliver this percutaneously. So that allows for a greater market opportunity, if you will, because there are geographic variances where you see sometimes that interventional radiologists may be doing the biopsies in these patients, and sometimes it's not always the endoscopist. So where we see these differences on a geographic basis, we'll be able to slot into that what we know to be common practice and then perhaps use a different method to deliver the product. So that's very important. That trial is now progressing. We've gotten now to the stage where the team at the University of Amsterdam will go to the ethics committee, because the first 5 patients in that trial were done under general anesthetic, which means we needed the anesthesiology team involved. Now that they're satisfied that that is safe, they're moving into the stage where the patient will just be consciously sedated. We would not any longer need the anesthesiology team. So this would make the procedure much faster. These patients can be essentially treated in 15 to 20 minutes, and the treatment is done. So it helps us to expand the market in terms of that user base that may also be able to do this treatment. That's not to say that we in any way abandon endoscopy. That's not the case. So it's just simply adding another user to be able to administer the technology safely.
Okay, all right. Now, you have previously defined the GBA opportunity in Germany as one of your inflection points for OSL. What stage are you at now? And could you please explain why this is taking longer than originally expected?
Well, unfortunately, we wish we had a crystal ball here. It's one of those situations where it's an organization that reports into the German parliament. It's political. And we don't have direct interaction with the GBA. That interaction is handled through, for lack of a better term, a middleman. But the middleman happens to be the University of Cologne, who is the lead center for the trial that would be conducted under GBA. Now, the interest is clearly there. If one looks back over 3 years, we had the first set of hospitals that applied to the GBA for this, what's known as the NUB status. So that 25 hospitals. The next year we went to 33, and this past January, we're up significantly with 84 hospitals. Now, in my opinion, it's very clear to me that 84 hospitals are not going to have the necessary infrastructure to do this. I think we're arguably looking at 35 to 45 hospitals that have experience in treating pancreatic cancer patients. When I say experience, they have a good surgical team on board as well. So these hospitals are our focus, our primary focus. The reason for the delay is it's rather convoluted and somewhat complicated, in that because we don't have FOLFIRINOX on our label, the GBA has said, well, how do we handle a trial that's off with an off-label drug as a comparator? So that's a bit of a challenge, and that's something that they're still trying to get their head around. It's more of a political and a legal issue. It's not a clinical issue.
Okay.
The standard of care in Germany is FOLFIRINOX in this patient population. Germany has what's known as the S3 guidelines, which are guidelines that physicians follow in terms of what they will do in terms of the steps from the patient treatment pathway, and the chemotherapy on the S3 guidelines happens to be FOLFIRINOX. So we've said, well, in the interest here of following the guidelines, and our scientific expert has told the GBA the same thing, you're doing a trial, we can start the trial with patients that are already on FOLFIRINOX. We can stop, they can be given gemcitabine, they can be given the OncoSil device, and then they can resume with the FOLFIRINOX regimen. So it's really not an off-label situation, but it's complicated because it's become a bit of a legal issue as far as the GBA is concerned. Now we were actually hoping that we could put this thing to bed by the end of this current fiscal year, which runs to the end of this month. It seems as though it's going to go a little bit longer. We've applied some legal pressure, we've applied some political pressure. Parliament is just getting back into session, so we anticipate that we may have some news coming out of one of the parliamentarians that actually has oversight over GBA. So we anticipate that she will have some news for us, because she's actually quite frustrated and astounded that this has not moved forward since the last time we've met with her.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that one. And then just probably one of the last ones for me. So the PANCOSIL is a trial. PANCOSIL is a clinical trial that you previously mentioned as potentially being transformative for your business. Could you please elaborate on this one?
Yeah, I think it's transformative because I think, if I go back and I look at a technology called radioembolization. That's something that I was involved in very early on. So I had the pleasure of launching that technology in the US and then launching it in Europe as well. And clearly the specialty that put this technology on the map were the interventional radiologists. And I think that's why the PANCOSIL trial is important, and it's particularly important when one considers the U.S. market. So I anticipate that patients can self-refer in the U.S. It's not common for patients to be able to do that here. And self-referring in the US means that they can actually find an interventional radiologist that would be doing this procedure, that would have adopted the OncoSil procedure. And even though the patient is owned by, quote unquote, the oncologist, the interventional radiologist has the ability to pull these patients in and treat them and also manage them. So it's a little bit different than what we see in other jurisdictions around the world. But I think it's particularly important in how we approach the US market.
Okay. So with relation to the OncoSil procedures, will the London clinic be performing any more?
Well, the London clinic, ironically, has not performed a single procedure. They are approved to do so. There have been some issues where some of the team that would be doing this procedure at the London clinic no longer have privileges there and have moved on to another private institution. Now, that said, the problem that we have now is that it's nothing that's insurmountable. It's that the other hospital doesn't have a nuclear medicine storage facility, so that's something that currently that they're working on. So the existing team that were at the London clinic have the ability, to do this at another institution. It doesn't mean to say that the London clinic won't do this. They will do it. They are approved by Bupa and AXA for patients that are insured under both of those schemes. Will be covered if they're treated at the London clinic. Most recently, one of the other private institutions by the name of Imperial College, which is associated or affiliated with Hammersmith Hospital, they're the private wing. They now have insurance coverage from the largest insurer in the UK. So we anticipate that others will undergo the same procedure. And this isn't a direct approval between the insurance companies such as Bupa and AXA with OncoSil. It's each individual private hospital has to submit their own proposal for funding to the insurers. So, we think that this is actually going to be it's looking to be quite positive at the moment. So we anticipate that there'll be a few other private clinics in the UK that are going down this road as well.
Okay. Okay. And then with the UK clinics kind of covered off now, regarding the European hospitals, have they performed any more operations in the last 2 months as well?
When you say operations, are you talking about surgery, or are you talking, down? And one of the things that this technology enables physicians to do is to downstage these patients, because before they enter the treatment, they're deemed to be unresectable. So a response to the OncoSil treatment may mean that the surgeon can go in and surgically remove the balance of the tumor, whereas previously it might have been in a spot where it was unsafe to be able to try to remove that. So the question is, if it's related to downstaging patients to surgery. There have been 3 patients actually that have been downstage to surgery, but it's important to bear in mind that when you're dealing with radiation, you can have a nadir to response that can go out 6 or 8 months.
Yep.
So it may mean that some of the patients that have been recently treated, they're not quite there yet. So it's not every patient that would be a candidate for surgical resection. However, I think it's important to remember that it does take significant time, and these patients are being evaluated all the time in terms of their response. So once there is a response and the surgeon says, okay, it looks like I can now go in and do this safely, the tumor has sufficiently retracted away from vascular structures that I'm not going to damage that and put the patient at risk.
Yep.
So it takes time. But as I said, there have been 3 patients that have gone on to resection. Those patients are in Spain, but we anticipate that more, this will happen more frequently. Now, certainly in Australia, we treat patients under the special access scheme. And the most formidable, I would say, experience has been at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and they have a very good response to their patients. Have a good response to the treatment, so they're able to resect quite a number of patients.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that one. We'll just move on to a couple of questions submitted by attendees now.
Please.
Because we're on the topic of Australia now, will there be a TJA application in Australia for OncoSil?
Yes, and I'll tell you why there is a link. Every company with a medical device. Now, I'm gonna talk about Europe here for 2 minutes, because it's important, because it leads into TGA. So every medical device, whether it's a syringe or whether it's a catheter or whether it's the OncoSil device, needs to undergo something that is called MDR. So, and that's in order to protect your CE mark. So this is something that was supposed to have been completed. We filed MDR quite some time ago. We anticipate that we may have MDR approval sometime in August or September of this year. Now, what we do know is that once a company has MDR approval, TGA will consider that data in the application for regulatory approval in Australia. So that's a positive for us. And if they accept that data, then the typical turnaround time for approval is 4 to 6 weeks if we're not selected for an audit. If we're selected for an audit, it could be as long as 6 months. However, it's a positive that we take from this, because the the rigor that we've had to undergo in terms of making the MDR application in Europe has been substantial. I mean, we've probably answered upwards of 330 questions to satisfy the regulatory body in Europe. And I think that's why TGA consider that this is a very robust exercise in order for companies to get MDR. So that's perhaps the reason why they are willing to accept the MDR application for TGA approval as well.
Okay.
So that's encouraging.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a couple of others here. We'll just pivot back to the FDA announcement. So obviously, with respect to the FDA announcement, it's expected to be within the calendar year, as you stated earlier. Now, ideally, what outcome are you expecting to announce? And what do you think is the probability of achieving that outcome?
Well, look, I think one of the things that we would like to see happen is a face-to-face meeting. FDA are now more receptive to that. I think this is something where it's not something that's easily done over a Zoom call or a Teams call. I think you need to be in the room with the panel, and you need to have your experts in there with you. So, we have a group of experts that will support us. These are clinicians that are at the top of their game. One of them happens to be very highly published in cholangiocarcinoma. So they're working with us at the moment. They're our key opinion leaders. We're hoping that we have a pathway forward, and that even if it means that we have to show some degree of compromise, whether it's a small post-marketing phase 4 study that will get us across the line to approval, it's something that we're obviously willing to entertain.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something that is substantial. This isn't a huge indication. But however, I think the most important thing for us is to get an FDA approval, because when you can tell somebody that we're FDA approved, it resonates on a global scale.
Yeah.
There are other countries that, let's face it, FDA and the United States, the US is always going to be the world's most lucrative market for the foreseeable future. So it's very important for us to have that ability to say, yes, we are FDA approved. And that resonates in many markets around the world. So those are the positive downstream effects that we see coming out of this.
Okay. Just moving on now. So what is the projected timeline to fully recruit the TRIPP FFX and PANCOSIL trials?
PANCOSIL, I'm very confident that we can get this done before the end of this calendar year. Now, because we're moving into just conscious sedation, we don't need to bring in anesthesiology. The patient doesn't, need to be anesthetized. And there was always, I would say, timing issues between interventional radiology and anesthesiology, because they're not, let's face it, they're not used to working. They're two specialties that are not used to working together. This brought them together, but the first 5 patients needed to be done under general anesthesia because the ethics committee wanted to see what the safety profile looked like before agreeing to move on to the next step. So I anticipate, there is a second hospital that will join the PANCOSIL trial, and that's a hospital that's based in Utrecht. It's not the academic hospital, but it's another hospital that is, very substantial, and they work very closely with AMC. So we anticipate that we should be able to pull in, 3-4 patients out of a target to be treated. And, we have a target once a month. So look, after the first 20 patients, our intention as a company, with the permission of the clinicians at Amsterdam, is to look at that safety data. And if we, in confidence, can submit that data to the regulator, we're hopeful that if they deem the treatment to be safe enough under conscious sedation, that we can add this to our label.
Yeah.
So that just opens things up for us as an opportunity as well.
Okay. Just moving on to some more sales and finance related questions here. So, what's the actual sales price for OncoSil in the public market?
It's not something I'm actually at liberty to disclose, because we have a difference in a major market compared to some of the smaller markets. And I have to be a little bit cautious about that. So unfortunately, as much as I would like to disclose the sales price, I can't, because I would be, it puts us in a compromising situation. But by the way, I didn't finish answering the prior question. So TRIPP FFX, that recruitment is likely to be completed by the end of the first quarter of next year. It's our plan.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for rolling back with that one. And you did speak briefly earlier on regarding the cap raise and the money raise, and that being able to carry you through until kind of your sales revenue hits a break-even point. Now, realistically, how likely and when do you reckon that break-even point will be?
Well, we're hoping that we'll get to break-even point by the end of next calendar year. Not the end of our next fiscal year, but the end of next calendar year. So by the end of 2025, perhaps early 2026. I can say that we're seeing an uptick now in sales. I think, we'll be very pleased with this. I can't give you numbers, but, as somebody leading this organization, I'm pretty pleased with what I've seen in this current quarter. And I think there are more hospitals that are just about to come on stream in Italy, because we've changed the way that we've done things in that market, and this opens us up to more reimbursement opportunities in Italy. So we expect Italy to be following Spain as the leaders at this particular point in time for the technology. So, I mean, even small markets like Greece, for example, they're developing. We've got one hospital that's developing the technology, the treatment with the technology quite consistently. And that's the same thing in a small market like Israel. So, geographic expansion is very important for us. And that's going to also assist us to getting into a break-even situation. We've just opened up the Turkish market. We've treated the first patient there. Now, I can tell you that it will take probably 6 months for that market to start to really develop. But prior experience in that market with another technology, once they're confident, that market can generate some significant numbers.
Okay. And with the notion of trying to reach the break even by the end of next calendar year, is that operating is that statement operating on the assumption that you get certain approvals, or you, with current kind of compliance laws?
I'm not even, believe it or not, I'm not even factoring in Germany and a GBA approval in those numbers. So the GBA happens, that's a different story altogether. Break even would happen very, very quickly, because I mentioned earlier on in our conversation that, we anticipate 35 to 45 hospitals being able to do this. Those hospitals, once the GBA says, okay, now we've got the green light, we will move ahead with the study, that impacts us commercially because those hospitals will now have the ability to negotiate for commercial treatments. So that's a complete game changer. So that's why this is something that's very important to us as a company, and we'll continue to push.
Okay, all right. And just another one relating to the commercial aspects of the company. Now, William Kidder was appointed to look at commercial partners slash acquisition opportunities. Was there any
Right.
interest from any parties slash companies, or is this still a play, or has it been abandoned?
It's still in play. There has been interest. Look, there are times where you get into discussions with companies and it's like somebody going into a car dealership and people are kicking tires and they're not sure. And sometimes there've been a couple of instances where we've been through discussions with parties and really they've been exercises that it's more about finding out what we're doing and where we're headed and there was sometimes I think not a genuine interest. But we are involved in some discussions now. So, yes, the process is ongoing. Now, whether that comes through as a strategic partner slash investor in order to move things forward for us to be able to do additional clinical work, or whether it's the potential for a complete M&A. We're not at that stage of discussion yet.
Okay, yeah. Now, just moving back to focus on OncoSil again. Now, what do you see as the goal and target of OncoSil, and what do you actually see from using OncoSil in terms of effect on the tumor, especially in a situation where the tumor becomes inactive? And then, does OncoSil kill the tumor, and does it not allow it to continue to have effect, or is it just anesthetize for an unknown period?
Okay, so I think I understand the question. Let me take a stab at it. Okay, so we're delivering with OncoSil, we're delivering much higher doses of radiation that can be given with an external beam machine. So radiation is measured in units of gray. Too complicated to explain here, but suffice it to say, with external beam, we can give approximately 55 gray of radiation. So that's with EBRT, conventional external beam radiation, or SBRT, stereotactic body radiation. Approximately 55 gray. So if you give more than that, then you run the risk of causing damage to neighboring structures, neighboring organs, because when you have a beam coming through, it's got to go through somewhere. It may touch other organs to get to the pancreatic tumor. So, and that's where the caution comes in from a radiation oncology point of view, because they have an upper limit as to what they can administer. So because we're giving radiation from the inside out, the product is injected directly into the tumor. So we're giving 100 gray to the tumor and upward. So in many cases, more than double what can be given with conventional external beam or stereotactic radiation. The the treatment has the ability to shrink the tumor. Most pancreatic tumors, the 35% that we're interested in, that we're able to treat, they're unresectable because they infiltrate vascular structures, which means the surgeon can't go in and safely remove the tumor because there's a risk that they damage vascular structures, and they could potentially cause the patient significant harm, or it could even lead to death because it's just far too complicated. So what the OncoSil treatment allows to happen, and this isn't done in isolation, please bear in mind that once the OncoSil device has been administered, the patient still continues with their chemotherapy, because cancer is a systemic disease, even though we are a local treatment within the pancreatic tumor, but we have the ability to shrink the tumor, and the tumor starts to pull away from those structures that it was previously infiltrating. And the patient's being evaluated under CT periodically, and the surgeon may say, okay, now it's 6 months down the road, let's take a look at this patient. And he may say, well, it looks like I can go in and I can safely resect the balance of this tumor. Now, resection is surgery with curative intent. Resection is the gold standard. If we can remove something with any tumor, it doesn't matter whether it's a pancreatic tumor or not, if it's a solid tumor and you can surgically remove it, that offers the patient the best long-term prognosis for survival. So, and that's the same thing here with the OncoSil treatment. If one looks at the 24 patients, the patients that were treated in the PANCOSIL trial, we read 24% downstaging to resection. Those patients actually lived a long time. So we can extend life. We have the potential to extend life once the patient has undergone, excuse me, surgical resection of their tumor. I hope that answers the question.
Well, it does. Thank you very much. Now, a couple of others here. What is the likelihood of public reimbursement for the OncoSil device in essentially all international markets that we're currently exposed to?
So public reimbursement differs. There is no one reimbursement system that's the same in Europe. Europe is a little bit like a dog's breakfast. It varies from market to market. So what may be expected in one market is not necessarily going to be the same thing in another market. Typically, payers look to randomized data. What are you better compared to? Now, we don't have randomized data, right? So it's something that we would need to bear out in a randomized clinical study. And the intent here is that a GBA study would do just that. So there would be spin-offs from the results of a positive GBA trial that would resonate in other European markets that we could use that data. In the United States, under an HDE, I mentioned very early on in this webinar that we're not required to show efficacy of the product, but under the HDE, we are able to get the product reimbursed. And the beauty of the US market is that it's a single reimbursement system. It isn't something that, in this state, it's X, in this state, it's Y. No, it's a single homogeneous reimbursement system. And although we will, we'll have an indication that is much smaller than locally advanced pancreatic cancer, nevertheless, it gives us a foothold in that market, and we can establish ourselves and then decide whether we do a pivotal trial in the United States or not.
Okay. So, other than all the countries that you previously mentioned, do you anticipate any other regulatory approval for the OncoSil device in obviously other countries not mentioned?
Yes, we anticipate that we'll be able to get regulatory approval in South Korea. And as a matter of fact, there's a high likelihood that we also get orphan status in South Korea. We anticipate we've signed a deal now in Saudi Arabia. So some of the areas that we are targeting are areas that I would consider to be favorable from a reimbursement point of view as well. In Saudi Arabia, it's known that any Saudi citizen will have guaranteed healthcare coverage, irrespective of what it is. So when we are approved in Saudi Arabia and we launch the technology, those patients that are qualified for the treatment will be reimbursed.
Okay. Well, on the topic of Saudi Arabia, how important do you think that marketplace is going to be to the development of the company as well as OncoSil?
Well, I think it's look, it's a patient population that is certainly the biggest in the Middle East. The reported numbers of patients per global can, I think, are not accurate. I think the registry data isn't particularly accurate. So I think the number is underreported, as we see in a number of countries where we don't believe that the numbers are accurate, and that's that's not something that I can answer specifically as to why. But certainly, from prior experience, again, in dealing in Saudi Arabia, it could be a very robust market for a technology like OncoSil.
Just to wrap up, we've got a couple more here. Now, relating to the recent cap raise, the petition
Mhm.
asking how much capital was actually raised.
So actually, we've raised almost all of it.
Okay.
All of what we set out to raise. We have a shortfall of $331,000, but that will be spoken for. So we'll close this out, and I would say that we'll end up with 100%. So this still remains open until July 24th, where we have the ability to close out the shortfall. So I'm very confident that that will happen. Very pleased, that we were able to bring on some new sophisticated and professional investors. We look forward to bringing people into the money with the short-term options as well.
Yeah.
That we believe they were attractively priced at 0.9 cents. And the inflection points that we've defined for the company, we anticipate that they will dovetail quite nicely in with the exercise date of the options of June 30, 2025. So
Yeah.
we're very pleased with that.
Okay. Now, do you guys benefit from the Australian R&D tax credit? And would you
We
encourage
do.
a
We do.
company to run clinical trials in Australia on that basis?
We actually have just added the two Australian centers, the Epworth in Melbourne, and we've added Royal Adelaide Hospital to the TRIPP study. So indeed, yes, we do take advantage of that. Last year, I think we ended up getting just over $1 million in tax credit, and then we anticipate around the same for this current financial year.
Okay. All right. And is there any news related to sales in New Zealand?
Yes, I can't say too much, but that will restart. It'll restart at a different hospital. There are issues in New Zealand that no money is supposed to be changing hands between a government hospital and a patient. So the team there needed to find a private hospital willing to allow them to conduct the treatment. And there is a hospital that is just down the street from the existing one where they were doing treatments, and they've just applied for their license. Every hospital has to have the isotope listed on their license. So once that's done, then we anticipate that they will start up again.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, we anticipate that market to become active again.
Okay. Now, speaking of undiscussed markets, so Hong Kong was approved for the OncoSil device at the Prince of Wales Hospital. Will there be any treatments in Hong Kong?
Prince of Wales Hospital did one treatment. They actually have a clinical trial, which they've actually published on clinicaltrials.gov, but it's inactive. And the target now for our distributor is to try to get this started at Chinese University of Hong Kong, and also possibly at one of the private hospitals by the way of Hong Kong Sanatorium. So those are the two target hospitals that they are trying to get the treatment started at the moment. And of course, there's, we've talked about China, Greater Bay Area, and that takes a little bit more time, but it's something that they're working on too.
Okay. And just to
Because
finish,
sorry, the prerequisite for getting into the China Greater Bay Area is that you have a Hong Kong approval. So, and that we do. So that gives us the ability to explore opportunities in that marketplace.
Okay. And then just to wrap things up with the capital raise, on the basis that it's 100% filled, how much is actually going to be raised?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
So on the basis, with the most recent cap raise, on the basis that it's 100% filled, so that
what will that eventual number be?
Yes.
Yeah, it's about 7.1.
Okay. 7.1 million. All right. Well, that about wraps everything up on my end, Nigel. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for participating. Thanks for the questions. Always good questions. And I look forward to doing more of these and updating our shareholders as we go along. Once we have news, I think it's a good idea to use this format to discuss milestones, as you will, as they fall into place. So looking forward to the next one.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this evening. And thank you very much, Nigel, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.